Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another disc guidance segment with the 2MK team. Today we are looking at our Seth bot, which actually got done in about a day because Seth is a super complicated character, but not in terms of the inputs of what he does. Therefore, we can basically begin immediately in talking about how SethBot is used, and of course later on how to input the bot itself. You're going to be seeing us switch between various characters, and of course we'll be talking about both the triggers and the skills as we go, but the bot does have a recommended form, and while we do the introduction we will be showing off some of the behavior so that you can quickly see how it should behave. You know, start of stream, easiest to find. So you can watch the bot for a little bit and while I talk, and I'll show you what it's mostly supposed to look like when it's working. The settings for now are maximum start on both meters as usual. You don't usually have to do this, but it does help make the bot a little harder and quickly brings you into seeing things it does. Seth as a character so far, we don't actually have that much data about how other people intend to play this character, but understanding how Seth worked before, combined with what Seth's normals are like, has given us a fairly clear idea of the standard flow that a first order strategy, bronze to silver beginner style player might use for this character. We also did some tests with the CPU. As always, we'll be showing that off a little later in the stream to demonstrate the difference and what you can learn from the CPU side. But the most important thing to understand about Seth as a character is quite simple. Seth has the ability to grab moves from other characters, and there seems to be a bit of a law to this. Even if you don't see on this stream, or you don't know what to expect Seth to take from you, because no one has ever mentioned it or you forgot, this might be a little easier to remember. Seth almost always takes a forward moving attack first, unless the character has a very iconic attack that you would probably remember because that's the thing they're known for. After that, the next priority goes to projectiles in nearly every case, or something similar to a projectile. And only when you found a character that has no projectiles and no simple style forward moving attacks will you get Seth absorbing something else. There are two characters that break this general rule set. One of them, you could argue, isn't exactly a break of the rules, and the other one is just weird. Despite Lara having a forward moving move to use as an option, Seth steals Lara's clap instead. But we could argue that that's probably iconic to her. And of course, the more confusing thing is that of all of the options to take from G, Seth takes the wheel kick. But we can also see how that might matter, given that G-Burst is kind of a strange move to begin with. Even if the move only moves you forward a little bit, for the most part, assume it will be like that, mainly because the thing Seth gets out of these the most is a move that combos out of other things that Seth is doing. There are a few characters where this isn't true, but for the most part, we're fairly sure they wanted to make you able to do things and then combo from things into whatever you've absorbed. Especially since you can't actually use the V skill in any combo styles that we've found so far. All of this is of course for V skill 1. V skill 2 is a different thing, and for a few matchups we expect to see V skill 2 used more often. We'll show those off during specific interactions with characters you will see on the stream, because it just seems to us to be the more sensible thing to do for those matchups. In this case, you can see that Seth is receiving Seppo, and technically you can have moves that have 2 parts, and Seth will find various ways to use those, usually because the moves don't involve pressing the button twice, they involve pressing a follow-up button. This applies to Kameen, where he gets Vanity Step, and can choose not to do the second part of it, same way she can. And for Kareen, where Seth gets Seppo, and generally we haven't seen any sign of Tenko, only of Orochi, but that could easily be how we input the bot. I don't think I put many of any standing punches in here. At least not of the type that would be likely to cause it. Oh, there we go. So we'll thank Sethbot for demonstrating that, even though it's never done so before. Generally, our concept of how this character will have to be played is manipulating and using that large range Seth has, and general ability to stay relatively safe when normals and specials are correctly spaced, with the biggest downside or weakness of the character technically being some difficulty with anti-airs. Though it's a bit derogatory, I do consider this character to be closer to Chun, but with one button confirms. Your aim is to stay out of range and break the opponent's expectations, and then mess with them by grabbing them with the skill or something when they think they're going to play footsies. It does not do a lot of damage, but you do have some good options there. Seth does have a slightly better zoning style jump, and a bit more variability in other moves. Our main point of surprise, which informed the bot's design, is that Seth does not seem to have a lot of advantageous standing normals. This, however, also is a genuine thing that causes characters to not be so great at anti-airs. Because their standing normals do serve the purpose of often being the anti-air button, but that does not mean that they end up being plus, they're not advantaged. Therefore we focused on more so things like this. There are some target combos in there, but as the bot is not really about the bot punishing you, you can see the flow here already. As for a brief explanation of what one is trying to do against it, similar to how Gil will be difficult to get in on if you don't know what you're doing, and spend a lot of time forcing you to whiff punish, Seth is like that, except that it's less whiff punishing, and more so understanding how to go through certain of Seth's moves, or react to certain things with jumping. Therefore, to our situation, the thing you need most against this character is confidence. While I would not consider Seth an execution test per se, there's no, you must react to this in this space of time, or die. If you want to get damage, that's often required. And any mis-execution of a specific type of counter often results in a very negative situation for you. So, overall, what you're actually doing is generally simple. And here, as always, defend and punish against sets the trigger activations, usually. You can practice your punishes against other things, of course, but the bot is generally intended to try to stay out of those ranges. And we're not going to ask the player to put themselves in that position where they are waiting for that to happen. But when V-Trigger is active, Seth will definitely sometimes, not necessarily all that often, but will definitely sometimes cancel into the V-Trigger. You can treat the point system the same way whether or not Seth is in V-Trigger 1 or 2. In fact, we'll change now to Seth V-Trigger 2 to make it a little clearer how this works. One thing you'll notice will be missing from this version of the bot, which you can put in, but we find to be unhelpful at the moment, we'll have some explanations as to how to add it later, is Seth's uppercut Mad Cradle. But here you have the use of V-Trigger 2. The inputs we've used for the bot mostly have made this a little predictable sometimes. It's more so like Seth has about 4 different sequences. They're usually not that bad though. And given where the V-Trigger activation happens in the inputs, you shouldn't ever be able to know for sure which one is going to happen. Since this is often cancelled out of as well, depending on your situation, defending from it can be difficult. So it's good to work on understanding that too. But basically the point system doesn't change because you've changed Seth's V-Trigger. The bot tends to use this defensively, specifically because we figured if we were going to use it offensively, it's the same as when you do things like with Lanta's VT2. If the player is doing anything sensible at all, you're getting a hit. You don't get a choice in doing anything about it. The best you can get is mashing out when they mess it up. But in terms of what the bot should teach you, that's never our priority. Your goals therefore are similar to Zeku, hit Seth from max range, with some normal. Without getting grabbed into installs or something. And here, and punish some of Seth's moves. Specifically, you're punishing the V-Trigger activation that happens after certain things. You can actually somewhat punish this orb version of the V-Trigger as well. So you can still consider about the same. From there it gets a little complicated by character, and we're likely to have at least some differences in the requirements per character for the last point system. But overall, that's your goal. Part of the reason for this is because since the aim will be to make sure you find a way to get close enough to Seth to actually do damage, if your character needs to do that, you're going to have to learn to punish or deal with certain of Seth's keep away options. Therefore, we'll move on to displaying something related to that now. But as always, we'll spend some time showing off the actual inputs of the bot before we go into that in full. Learning to be confident enough when facing off with any character who has some specific difficult thing you need to react to is something you have to build up over time, pushing yourself to become more confident and capable in the game at all different times. For now though, we're going to Colleen to demonstrate this very directly. Colleen has a lot of options because Seth has a lot of moves that tend to be obvious beforehand. But obviously, if you overdo it, if you flinch, if you make the wrong choice, you're going to take damage instead of doing much of it. So with that in mind, let's go into the inputs for the bot before we do anything else. In this case, I'll turn off the attack data. Action 1, not easy to see because I've done this part, but action 1 is a first frame, back, light punch plus heavy kick, and you must hold the light punch aspect of it. From there, you want to go to forward as quickly as you can, preferably not to do a half circle or anything to get too forward. Just try your best to go straight to forward or more or less straight to forward. Then hold up forward, 9 basically, and then do basically a 360 back around to forward and end the recording there. The difficulty in this is understanding exactly how long to hold the up forward input, because you can't just do this as quickly as you want. There's a specific timing where you either have to press it for the first time, like you've waited a certain amount of time into the kick to do any of it, or any of the rest of it, or you held the up forward for a little bit longer, which doesn't always help as much. The purpose is to get this jump in. It doesn't have to be perfect every time, you don't have to make sure that the jump in always hits. But it does help if you can get the jump in to actually hit the character. If you've held it for long enough, it'll usually be fine because some other input will cause the up forward input to start a little late. Basically, we'll get to the end of some other animation and then do up forward. But the important thing here is hold that light punch all the way to the end, which means that when you replay it, you should only see the heavy kicks as you're seeing here. If you do this at the right speed, it will allow for certain combos later on. This is generally an easy input and it's fairly lenient. If you don't get the jump in right at the beginning but you just want to keep practicing, go ahead and use it. Slot 2 is similar. This is a forward triple kick, but it does also have an up forward in it, right after that forward triple kick. And then, from there, half circle back. So you're going back to forward, and then through the full half circle back motion, which ends up granting Seth the kick, and, depending on your timing and spacing, also the aerial version of the kick since the 9 would have come in. Depending on your timing for this, Seth will do this at different heights, but it's more or less the same as the first input. if some other move is animating, such that Seth's 9, Seth's up forward, actually takes effect a little later, then the timing for the kick will vary. There's no need to hold that triple kick, so don't worry about that. In fact, technically it's better if you don't. Slot 3 is a little bit more complex, but not that bad. It's mostly a sequence. For those of you who do want Seth's uppercut, there's a different way to input this one. Specifically, the input itself is a down back medium punch, and could be down medium punch, down heavy punch, a quarter circle forward medium punch, followed by either forward V skill, forward V trigger, or just flat V trigger. It does not matter really. Basically, you are pressing the heavy punch while the medium punch is animating, and you're pressing the V trigger basically right after you press the medium punch the second time, and then you just end the recording immediately. The result of this should generally be repetitions of medium punch hands, with some timings in which the crouch heavy punch happens. In order to get Mad Cradle, Seth's uppercut, you generally will have to do this by pressing down forward medium punch. If you're not familiar with how to make those sorts of recordings, please note that you can change it so that button input when you are recording can be set to 1 second, and when you start, therefore, you press and hold the direction you want and just wait. When that 1 second is up, the game will not start recording immediately, but it will hold your direction for you. As long as you keep on holding down forward, as soon as you press a button, it will record it as down forward plus that button. We mention this fairly often, but it bears bringing up in this case too. It helps if you use down back, mostly because it helps Seth block properly, occasionally at least. But if you're really more interested in Seth's uppercuts, that's usually the better way to do it. So down forward if you want Mad Cradle, and you get a lot of Mad Cradle, and down back if you don't. So far we haven't found a good reason for the bot to use Mad Cradle as much as this causes, and we just decided to have him not use it at all. But your mileage may vary, and you should check out which one suits you better. Slot 4 is a little more complicated, and you're probably going to want to do the same thing in terms of recordings. You can set a button to get either throw on one button and medium kick on another, or light punch on one button and light kick plus medium kick on another. Overall though, you have a very simple goal. Press the two buttons together so that you get light punch, light kick, medium kick, all in one, and do this with a back input. This is important mostly because you can do this the same way. If you're setting that recording setting to 1 second interval to wait, you can hold back, walk backward, and continue walking backward and then input this. The main thing here is to not blink it. Please make sure that all of those inputs are exactly on the same frame if possible, but if you happen to blink it so that it's just the light punch, it's fine. It's difficult to see when it's playing into itself, but if you find yourself having trouble not blinking, you can try setting it to light punch and then a different button for light kick plus medium kick, and whichever one you tend to press first when blinking should be the light punch one. The rest of the input is similarly simple. Press that once, release everything, press back again quickly and press those buttons again quickly. So you're not holding back in order to do this, you are holding back at the beginning, press those two buttons, release everything, hit back plus those buttons again. This is to help Seth get a dash timing that gets buffered into other things because Seth can't do any of the commands, but the two back inputs still work. Obviously this means it's quite fast. The last input there is a V skill input, as you see Seth repeatedly using V skill, and it doesn't really matter if you hold this V skill or not. If you do hold the V skill, it shifts one minor thing that nearly no one would ever notice. Specifically, it shifts the crouch medium punch at the beginning of the other input. But most of the time, since Seth will be whiffing certain things, you don't actually care. It means that he will do the heavy punch, the crouching heavy punch, more often. If you don't think that's necessary or don't feel as if it's a good move for Seth to be using, try to make sure to release the V skill button before you end the recording in whatever way suits you. As for what it does, as you've already seen, it just mostly either whiffs throw or uses this. When used in conjunction with that first action 1 input, where you held the light punch, it has the capacity to do a stand medium kick, which was something nice to sneak in and it'll have some effect. And finally, action 5 is a crouching medium kick, any type, preferably also first frame, followed by a V skill input, a crouching V skill input, and then a quarter circle forward and then a full half circle backward. The quarter circle forward does not have the purpose you'd expect it to have. It is in there to cause Seth's movement to be different and can be helpful in that way. But it's also just easier for most people when inputting this to do it in that flow, to go up to the forward direction in order to do the full half circle backward. This is more so a timing thing. If you try to do this by just pressing crouch medium kick and then doing a quarter circle backward, which would work, the timing tends to get off in a way that is hard to explain, so we suggest doing it this way. If you find that your inputs are relatively slower and for some reason the bot looks or feels wrong to you based on what you can see from this video, you can try doing it that way, especially if you are more of a beginner at inputs and you're still working out how best to time things. There is no need to hold this V skill either, and there's no real need for it to be first frame, but you might as well. But rather than go through the inputs relative to each other, Seth doesn't have a lot of things where you have to understand things only through that, and he uses very few edge shifts relatively. If you're familiar at all with why things work out, you know that the quarter circle and half circle back and forward will generally become complete moves when you apply the next button from the start of something else. And that's all that means. But let's look at CPU Seth, because we tend to show off why the bot is the way it is relative to the CPU. So let's take that. Our general problem with CPU Seth is that CPU Seth's entire game plan is walking forward and trying to catch you with buttons, which is not how we're expecting a lot of people to use this character. But at least, if it is turned out to be how people use this character, you can just use the CPU to decide. You can do all of that training on the CPU side. Our goal, therefore, create Runaway Seth instead of dealing with this input reading mad person. The odd thing is that also, like Honda, we've not so far found this to actually be good. It's more so relying on its ability to read inputs and do things that supposedly won't be expected by the player. As just demonstrated, it's not all that hard to recognize what Seth as a character is going to try to do. In fact, if I practice this for a little bit, it's actually easier to parry CPU Seth than it is to parry the bot, but only because of the way that the CPU character reads inputs. As you can see, it'll definitely wait if I start to parry too much, but that isn't really achieving anything. You haven't learned anything about flows, you're just as usual getting your inputs read, and that tells you nothing. As a player you can use this for trickery, but it's not really helpful toward flows as itself. Part of the reason why it does this, by the way, and jumps in that specific spacing is because it expects to be thrown. It makes for a good boss character. And we're sure that the position of Seth as Street Fighter 4 arcade mode boss character will be back to normal almost entirely. But the character is also not that hard to whiff punish, so it's really hard to decide what exactly this is for. If you find that most Seth you know walk up to you and hit you, then train with the CPU, see what you can learn to do about that, and hopefully it won't read too many inputs to make itself completely useless. But this is CPU difficulty 7, and whether or not you can learn anything from it, let us know. Maybe we will rethink how the bot is done, or make a different version based on how this works out. But our goal, as noted, is a more active and technically more punishable Seth. So this is going to definitely come off as easier, because it is. But let's turn back on everything now. And proceed to deeper discussion of both the point system and the aim and feelings that the bot is supposed to give you. Calm is important for reasons like that. If you tell Colleen she's about to catch these hands, she will absolutely do so. But in order to do this specifically, not only when Seth is in regular positions, but because he does so many different things, which have to be countered in different ways and at different ranges, you have to be able to not flinch. And flinching is a thing that happens when you think of doing a move in only one way. To give an example, it's easy to think of parry as something you do the quarter circle, you hit the button, and then you're not pressing anything else on the controller. It's just over. But this does not lead to the proper form for parrying with Colleen very much. The proper form for parrying with Colleen is actually to hold back until you've decided whether or not you want to actually press the button for the parry. Because at least then, you will have blocked. So this is the sort of thing I'm talking about in terms of confidence. I can learn to do quarter circle back, hold the back, and then decide, should I press a button because now the timing has ended and I should be able to do a normal? Should I press a kick to get out of the way of something using vanity step? Should I press nothing because what Seth has actually done is to go for V skill 1? Should I press nothing because I flinched and it's not time to be pressing anything because I'm going to get counter hit if I do? And so on. These little things determine quite well how successful I'm able to be at parrying things Seth does. And Seth is a relatively easily read character. He has a lot of moves with long animations, and even though walk speed is good, there's definitely some positions where if you got really used to it, since you don't have to play forward too much, you can do fairly well. But you can already see that if I think it's time to parry, I'm going to press the button anyway, which is entirely wrong. If I see a movement and press parry because I saw a movement, it's also entirely wrong. If I misjudge the range and press parry in that situation, still wrong. There's a lot of situations like that. This is not to mention doing all of this while focused on anti-airing or parrying other moves or similar things. And in Colleen's case, Seth has things that come from Colleen actually grabbing her that do make a difference to the matchup. Similarly, you have to get used to the range that the moves happen, so that you can make judgments about how to do things. And since Seth's attack, the hands attack you're seeing there, is actually only -4, you don't actually get a lot out of this if you can't get close for the punish. Your opponent might not be advantaged, but you can't hurt them. It's your turn, and depending on your range, it being your turn can be misleading. The bot is therefore meant to help you understand different things at different ranges. You can't just go, this move works like this. Therefore, as with almost all bots of this type, you learn a little bit by trying to stand at different places and seeing what the bot does. Or just having different experiences with it. It's a fairly easy bot to parry, but if you parry too much, you'll die. Simple as that. You also have to get used to not being able to throw on punishes that otherwise look like they should be throwable. Because Seth has a lot of these. Or maybe it's just my judgment of when things are throwable and bad. Technically, even Seth's grab has a way for Colleen at least to get out of it in that same timing. It's just a matter of hitting 2 kicks instead. So the same quarter circle back, holding the back, and realizing what your position is. For other characters, this is not going to be about parrying, but it's going to have similar parts of it. Recognizing, am I at exactly the range required to get this punish? Is the right thing about to happen? can I land this relatively shorter move I have or this relatively slower move I have? And for that, we're going to go take a look at Ibuki. Ibuki is a character whose combos and ranges are based on her being able to get in. A lot of the time, if you're trying to play footsies with this character, her moves are relatively slow. The opponent can't approach her, but you give her an opponent who can literally grab her from middle of the screen and do so without having to even worry about encountering her hitbox, and trouble starts. So, keeping in mind the point system, anti-airs, she's good at those. Getting around or through Seth's kick is usually the highest level point. Let's go with that for now. Punishing when Seth uses V-trigger cancels, also decent. But you can see how this would take a while in terms of the damage Ibuki does to get to a good spot. Basically, the points are going to be about, can you land your whole combo? And part of our reason for having this is because Tatsuki Dynasty has not practiced with Ibuki enough in every case to have full confidence in every combo. To be able to say, yes, I'm doing exactly this whole thing. It can be just timing, especially since the V-trigger cancels have odd block time, relatively speaking. It can be spacing in certain cases. Ibuki is not really a character that suffers from this a lot, but there are definitely characters where you've lost part of your punish because of this. And you can use your slower punishes, as she's now doing, to see which of these you get away with, because the bot will eventually do a faster version or find some solution. The bot is capable, for example, of hitting... If you did hold the triple kick, for example, you can get the bot to hit light punch sometimes. And depending on what else you hit in other places, you get different buttons. We don't suggest this. Again, we still don't actually suggest holding that triple kick. But you know. As you can expect, with Seth, it's a matter of taking, again, a forward-moving option. In this case, getting around things by going with the Kasumigake and usually the medium 1-2 dash to the other side. This means that Seth versus Ibuki is a matter of learning some Seth-Ibuki mix-up style things, as that's not really an attack. But still not bad overall. But no, our other point was max range normal, which for Ibuki is actually like her forward heavy kick or her forward heavy punch, more so the forward heavy kick. Compared to most characters, she's actually fairly good at landing this sort of thing on Seth, but the aim is to specifically do it from the max range, similar to Zaku, because you have to be able to simulate the idea of someone keeping you at that range using Seth's options. This is able to tell you whether or not your character's moves have good hitboxes that overcome Seth's moves in various ways, as this is entirely possible. This is technically somewhat easier for Ibuki than many other characters. But mostly confidence, choice of movement, and the ability to cleanly observe the opponent's flow. Here's one good example. There is a spacing at which just using Shinten against Seth's hands, Hekaton Shuri's, will not land. The Shinten will whiff, and Seth will get to do things. Understanding that exact spacing is itself the challenge. And you'll note here that while we are definitely seeing a lot more damage being done due to Seth and Ibuki being closer, the main reason Ibuki and Seth end up closer is because Seth is jumping and not being anti-aired, which is the bot being somewhat lenient, but you can already see how this works. If you do land the anti-air, the bot will tend to be further away and make you have to care about other things. So it is again one of our bots where the better you get at doing the required things, the more you will learn and the harder the entire thing becomes. Since we don't intend for this stream to go on for too long, we'll move on to showing off what happens when you give this bot the skill to. And I might as well give the trigger to at the same time, because while the two do not necessarily go together, for the characters we're about to see, it's not bad. One important thing to consider is that while you can easily parry and armor through many of Seth's moves, Seth's actual V-Skill 1 does break armor, meaning that you have to think about whether or not to use armored moves relative to your opponent's V-Skill setting. Just as Seth is constantly changing style, plan, and so on, you are going to have to change it somewhat as well. But fortunately, again, most of the time, the moves that Seth gets are not going to be tricky things from your character. One of the most surprising things probably is that he gets Manat's Orb and Falk's Staff for shot, but those are still just taking projectiles. So for now, we're now looking at what happens when Seth is using V skill 2, which is just basically a dash. This is also why you shouldn't really expect Seth players to be too confused or surprised when they are the ones playing against Incoming or Ibuki. Seth V's skill 1 already basically does that. Sorry, V skill 2 already basically does that. This move can be used as just a dash as shown, and it can be used with that follow-up you just saw as well. For characters that have very tight timed combos with single links, learning to punish certain things Seth does can be tricky purely because you have to get used to the block stun. And as you can see, the bot definitely has access to super in most ways it can be input. I can't think of how to input it without super being at least available. You can of course get used to just practicing things. For non-target combo characters this can be harder obviously. And because you don't necessarily know whether or not Seth is going to finish that move, the idea is that it will be somewhat stressful. If you don't find it stressful, well, that's probably good because there's not much else the character does that we have found or seen. It's more of a confirm into combos and become powerful character. Meaning that if you find this bot to be easy, good, you probably don't need to worry too much about Seth. This of course will depend at least somewhat on your character. Which is also why it was so important to give Seth the throw. Even though technically it is not part of the point system, it's still better for Seth to have it. Timing of the bot should generally mean that the crouch heavy punch is cancelled into V-trigger whenever possible. Meaning that in this case we're going to have to go back to actually putting this to maximum start. It was on auto recover for demonstration purposes. The bot itself should actually be, again, as noted before, maximum start both sides. Or rather, on both V and CA gauge for Seth. The specifics for yourself is one of those things where you decide what you want based on which combos you need to practice or what your characters needs resources-wise in order to get what they're doing. This bot is therefore similar to our Nash bot. Except that it's more so about actually knowing what you're doing instead of testing how good or bad your autopilot is. You go to the side of knowing what your autopilot is like and expanding the requirements seeing how well it stands up to it. The reason I'm showing this off against Chun-Li is because, in case you were not aware, the only thing Seth gets from stealing anything from Chun-Li is legs, which really is not that relevant to this, as it's just the unsafe version of hands. But that's really all there is to show off about that move as well. So onward we go. Now we will look into a character with no actually safe forward move, but with combos that need to be confirmed in a particular way. Specifically, we will have Cammy go now.
I'll be on guard.
If you play any of Mika, Balrog, Bison, not so much Bison because Bison actually has a safe version of this. But you should assume that if your character's forward moving move is usually unsafe or not easy to space safely and you don't want it to be just throwing it out in neutral to catch Seth, you're going to face this sort of matchup, where you have to land things and your footsies and walk speed are what really matter. That light punch. No points for punishing Seth's overhead kick. It's not that hard either to see coming or to actually punish. And we're leaving Seth on this because it's the same situation. Seth actually steals Spiral Arrow from Cammy, which is good for combos, but if you're defending properly it's really not that relevant. Cammy has a lot of good normals. Cammy has a lot of good ways to deal with Seth doing various normals. What she lacks is a really good way to make sure that Seth takes any damage. Depending on your style, this is made either worse or better by Seth's skill. But, as she is a character with a projectile invincible move, in fact multiple of them, you're not generally too worried about Seth's V-Trigger too, so we're going to change back to V-Skill and V-Trigger 1. Not because Seth using Spiral Arrow is good, but simply because it causes the matchup to be a bit more mid-range. A lot of the way people play Cammy involves sticking out buttons. And it's absolutely possible to beat Seth in footsies by just understanding the rhythm of Seth's movements. She has enough range on many of hers to get something out of it, and enough ways to punish that it's not a zero-sum game for her. It's mostly Lara that we found is likely to have a really bad time here. But it's still about confidence. You still have to be ready to punish a bunch of things Seth does, confidently believing or interpreting the way he did a specific thing. And while the bot will nearly never use it because we haven't input the bot that way, Seth does have a cross-up, and that is a big deal. You were able to see it from the CPU side. Meaning that if you are failing your anti-airs, you are vulnerable. Please remember that when practicing, because it's very difficult to get the light kick into the bot properly while still retaining everything else, but it's definitely something you're going to have to worry about on the jumps. One good way to think about this is how much of the time you end up hitting Seth purely because the bot keeps on hitting buttons. It's actually possible to resolve this somewhat by changing Action 5 to basically anything. This is another bot where we made sure that Action 5 is basically changeable. It's good that Seth occasionally does a low, but Seth doesn't tend to do the low at any really meaningful time. It's good that Seth has a medium kick at that spot for when jumping, but depending on your inputs, probably already did. Meaning you can go ahead and change that Action 5 to basically anything that suits your character and will make your life more difficult. We should have almost all of the required components from every other part of it, and the only thing you will lose is use of the V skill. Most of the rest of the rhythms of the bot won't change that much. Presumably, you'll do less of those spin kicks, which for many people is good. We're gonna do some work on variants, figure out what exactly would go well there. Try to make sure to get something for you. But those are probably going to have to be added over time. Feel free, of course, to suggest anything or send us any information you have about ones that have worked for you for your given character. It's precisely because of this that you need to be able to install whatever you need in slot 5. But you did just get to see the purpose of the low. Learning to whiff punish the Rectauntures itself is important, and we did consider that while it's more likely that the player is going to use the medium one, the heavy one does give a little additional range. That's more of a combo thing though. The medium one would be the way people would spam in neutral, probably to keep you away from them, because the light is a little too short, though it does have the benefit of being fast. Note that Seth actually can, if the bot is input correctly, get a negative edge version of even that. So there is a capability for Seth to use the light version of Rectauntures, meaning that you have to learn to tell the two apart. Although, to be fair, most of the time, because it's in Action 3 entirely, you're normally going to be seeing the medium one. But you will also see the light often enough that you will be able to recognize that you've been quote-unquote tricked a little bit. Because often when this happens, your whiff punish falls short. As you've just seen there. You can also, of course, use Action 5 to install Mad Cradle, or anything else you consider important. Note that Seth in this input often does have a very, very seldom used forward dash, but we don't know exactly where it comes from, so we're not willing to say, hey, this is the thing. It may have to do with buffering how quickly you input a specific thing, so we're not going to be consistent about it, and we're not going to expect that everyone's Seth has it. One important thing though comes up for when you're playing certain characters and Seth gets a move that actually has a really good effect on the matchup for him. And we do have one final demonstration for that, specifically Sakura. Sakura is one of the few matchups where Seth specifically benefits from the move that he takes from the opponent. It's not just to finish combos, it can be used in neutral. Colleen was another somewhat like this, but mostly Colleen players are too familiar with how Vanity Step works. And it's a long move, it has a lot of startup, it has a lot of action before anything threatening happens. But in this case, Sakura has a little bit of a harder time with it. Sakura being one of the characters where the thing Seth takes, you would think would be a projectile. But no, she has a forward moving move, it's just not one that we think of in that way most of the time, at least not most of us. What Seth takes from Sakura is that same Shunbukyaku. And this is a big deal because of the same reason that move is meaningful in normal play. Any move that allows you as the player to bypass neutral and not have to play a certain type of footsie, specifically the type where you have to get hit by crouching moves, tends to be helpful even if you are the one dominating footsies, because your opponent doesn't want to get the idea and then finally, just as they think they've got a handle on it, be put into that space of, okay, well, I have now bypassed footsies and I have stuff. What makes this worse is that whereas most of the others do a knockdown in a way that makes situations meaningfully different, but you know, it's still at least a mix-up, sorta. You're just dealing with wake-up. Because of the spacings and flow of Shunbukyaku, when Seth does get it, it tends to make things a little worse because the move does not knock down, but it does make the user plus. This is great when you're playing Sakura because she's a footsie character with not a lot of great move options. She hits, you have this, she can take a big risk, or she can continue to play footsies. In other words, the way that this move is worked into Sakura's game plan is such that you don't really care so much that she bypassed the neutral. You're not overwhelmed by the fact that this happened. It's similar to Okuma's Demon Flip or Hami's Hooligan combination. They either knock down or start a combo, but they don't really change the flow of the match. This is one of the few matches where that happens, and you can apply the same rules for any other match where the situation is the same, where a move is granted by the Tandinigen that results in Seth having a new way to bypass neutral. If you feel you have a character that this happens with, we strongly suggest that you focus most of your training with this bot on the skill 1, especially for characters that play neutral well and then have a neutral bypass move. Because then they're facing off their, not quite equal, but facing Seth in this is, you don't have a strong advantage. Often, Seth's V skill counters this move, and you're faced with a situation where Seth has a way basically to use your move better. Or rather, the way it fits into Seth's game plan is more painful than the way it fits into yours. So even if you could say, as most people would, well, I should be able to deal with this, I'm fighting a character who is using my own move, I'm familiar with this move. But in the case of a move like this, what is not so important is not the move, but the thing that follows the move. There are only a certain number of things that Sakura can do after doing Shukojaku. And the threat is therefore very different because Seth can do a different set of things. Worst of all, Seth actually does have quite a few moves that are similar to Sakura's flows, meaning that this just tends to work out, honestly. Fortunately, the basics of if you actually block the move and punish it don't change too much, at least in this case. So yes, in conclusion, if you find that the bot has a flow that is a little bit too easy to deal with, figure out the reason why that is. Usually it's just the bot doesn't block enough or repeats the spin kick too much. And while it is good as is, and that you will find in this stream, we will be adding other options when we release the bot on Sunday at the website 2-mk.org, because there will be other timings where you want the bot to do different things. Or maybe you just want to see if you can get the bot to do styling combos, because you absolutely can. There's also a specific BT you can probably get it to do, although it would obviously not do it consistently. There's a timing you can get for it. So feel free to experiment, feel free to let us know through the contact page at 2-mk.org what you can get yourself to do, and we'll add it to the page and credit you. Because everyone deserves to have as much information as possible about how to fight this character. All of the data. Well, hopefully it's helpful, and that brings us to relatively the end, as far as we know, of our primary bot content. We will obviously be working on other Street Fighter bots based on changes that happened in Championship Edition. We do specifically have some in mind already. You're going to see some Jury stuff, possibly some G stuff, maybe some Alex stuff, even though we originally thought that was not going to be so. You can check our bot checkup videos on YouTube to give you an idea of which characters will be getting new things. And if you have any specific ideas about which ones should, let us know. Minor note for Unist fans, since we now have 2 bots with this name, we will actually be moving the Unist Seth bot to uniseth.bot, as we have done. Well, we didn't move, but we have both MikaBot and Unist MikaBot. We will now have SethBot and Unist SethBot. So if somehow you did not realize this, it was going to change, we'll be making that change on the site as well. As always, in terms of other content, you can join us next week for more Street Fighter V on Monday in our Mishmashi Battle Lounge. And on Tuesday, the Tuesday train, which will most likely be Unist, actually. Let's see, today is... Yes, we would like to get one more session of that in before all of the changes that come in on the 20th, with the free update that is unclear. whatever that is actually supposed to be pronounced as or saying. On Wednesday, we will probably not be doing anything. We might have sandbag casuals, but we say that a lot. But Thursday should as always be Kame House. Our beginner now moving into intermediate lobby for Dragon Ball Fighters. And next week Friday, you should be able to get the Helena bot for Dead or Alive 6 that was preempted by managing to get Seth bot working so quickly. So of course, let's once again find all of those bots at 2-mk.org. But that brings us to the end of this guidance. You can check out our information on 2_mk_FGC on Twitter, specifically when we release the bot on Sunday, which is usually around 7 Eastern. We do have some more testing to do. That's our usual release time when we've had most of the weekend to do all of the work. So look out for that then. And until next time, this has been Brilliant along with Kanzuki Dynasty on the controller, demonstrating our Seth bot for this guidance. We hope it's helpful to you. Let us know. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.